Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway takes place in the co-main event of UFC 251, Fight Island Usman versus Masvidal. I'm still getting used to saying that as the event name. Masvidal stepping on short notice. Thank God we've now got an amazing event, but still. Volkanovski versus Holloway 2, the rematch is taking place in the co-main event. Don't let this be overshadowed by the main event. I know it probably is going to be overshadowed by the main event, but we've got to be very careful not to completely ignore this matchup. This is a big one for the future of the featherweight division. This might decide if Holloway's going to reinsert himself back into the conversation of greatest featherweight of all time. And in my opinion, if he does beat Alexander Volkanovski, I mean, look at his resume by now. If he does become a two-time featherweight world champion, the first two-time featherweight world champion in the history of the UFC. I know Aldo got the belt back after McGregor beat him, but come on, he fought for the interim belt with Frankie Edgar, then he just got promoted to champion. Like, it's a different kind of two-time world champion, I'm sure you'll agree. Holloway has a real chance here to cement himself as the greatest featherweight of all time if he beats Alexander Volkanovski. And by the way, if Holloway does get past Volkanovski, the other style matchups in the featherweight division are very good for him as champion. So this is a real big one for Holloway. Volkanovski, on the other hand, if he does win this fight against Holloway, he gets to remove all sense of doubt about a close decision in the first fight, which we're going to get into in a second here, because I have no idea why that is the narrative coming into this one. Like, we don't know who the better fighter is. We watched Volkanovski versus Holloway. We saw Volkanovski win. There was no confusion with the score whatsoever. Volkanovski won the fight. In my opinion, watching it live, I had it 4 rounds to 1 Volkanovski. Maybe it could have been 3-2 otherwise. But, you know, Volkanovski won that fight, and dare I mention, won that fight with a broken hand past the first round. But Alexander Volkanovski has a chance here to beat Holloway twice. Remember, Holloway had to beat Aldo twice, the former champion. If Volkanovski beats Holloway twice, that's it. There's no more talk of Holloway maybe being the best above Alexander Volkanovski. You beat him twice, and Joe Rogan has set this precedent from now on. Holloway beats Aldo twice. Doesn't matter what Aldo's done before, Holloway's the greatest featherweight of all time. I'm not saying that I agree with that being the condition on who the greatest is, but if Joe Rogan says something, that seems to be what the narrative goes with. You understand? Because Joe Rogan's voice is used in the promos, and whatever he says is used in the promos, and whatever is used in the promos fuels the narrative. So if Volkanovski does beat Max Holloway here, it'd be pretty hard to argue that he won't be the greatest featherweight in the world, maybe of all time, if he goes on to defend it a few times afterwards. But still, you beat Holloway, and it's not like Holloway got to Aldo, and Aldo was coming off the McGregor KO and a couple tough fights before them with Chad Mendes in a rematch, and Aldo was a bit older. Even though he's still young, he was worn as a fighter quite much, and people are saying he might be out of his prime. He doesn't throw leg kicks anymore. There's no debate about that with Max Holloway. He's 28 years old still. You're not beating this past prime Max Holloway who doesn't have it anymore and is slowing down and doesn't have the same pop and he's getting injured non-stop. This is a prime Holloway. This isn't even a prime Holloway. We've got a few years before we see prime Holloway. So if Volkanovski can get this jump on Holloway here, which I think he's going to, by the way, spoiler alert, I think Alexander Volkanovski is going to get the win over Max Holloway. If he defends it a couple more times, you're looking at the greatest featherweight of all time. Look at his fucking record. So underrated, and I don't even have the schedule up here because I'm that unprofessional, but still. Look at Alexander Volkanovski's record. 21-1. What? Like, he's got a ridiculous record, and if he does go on to beat Max Holloway, that's 22-1 at featherweight. He only lost a fight very early in his career by head kick when he didn't really know what he was doing. If you've seen the JRE podcast, he talks about how he just he jumped straight into the pro scene before even training too long. Same with Dan Hooker, those guys in those smaller areas where the sport isn't so developed, like Australia. It took us a while to break the Australian market, but in those areas where the sport isn't so developed, you get a lot of these guys jumping into the pro scene without the extensive experience in the gym that some of the guys in America would have. So you get those blemishes on your early record. But other than that one loss early in his career, 21-0, but 21-1 is a ridiculous record. He's beaten Aldo, which Holloway beat to become the greatest featherweight of all time in Joe Rogan's mind. Beat Aldo, beat Mendes. I mean, look at the resume Volkanovski's put up here. I think Volkanovski's going to beat Holloway in this rematch. I really do. A lot of people, honestly, let's just get to the bottom of this right now, because this needs to be discussed. People must have watched a different fight than me. and I'm sure a lot of people are going to agree with me here, some of the narrative and the conversations that came out of that Holloway versus Volkanovski fight were ridiculous. Let me just get this straight. The sport made an argument for open scoring. The media, Joe Rogan, everyone who's an analyst and an expert in the sport, made an argument for open scoring after watching Holloway versus Volkanovski 1. It wasn't that hard to score. Volkanovski literally outlanded him for 3 rounds. I thought he outlanded him for 4, but he didn't. Looking at the stats afterwards, he didn't. But he clearly outlanded Holloway for 3 rounds. By the way, after breaking his hand in the first or second round of that fight as well, and won the match. It wasn't like this close, controversial scorecard. I know Holloway's coaches were telling him that he was winning rounds, but they just don't know what they're watching if they thought he was winning any of those early 3 rounds. It was a clear 3 rounds to 2 for Volkanovski, and round 4 is in the air, but I'll give it to Holloway because of the stats. Volkanovski won that fight fair and square. Not to mention, a lot of people come in, and I'm listening to some of the Holloway arguments, and I'm trying to dissect what they're telling me. They're saying things like, Holloway figured him out in those later rounds. Volkanovski started to slow down. I didn't see any of that. I didn't see Holloway start to figure him out. I didn't see Volkanovski start to slow down. You know what I saw? I saw Volkanovski break his hand, still win rounds, then realize he's won all of those rounds, and then realize that all he has to do is survive. I think Volkanovski was waiting for the onslaught of Holloway that just never came because Holloway, for some bizarre reason, thought that he won one of those first 3 rounds, which is literally impossible. I mean, it was a close fight, don't get me wrong, but I feel like Volkanovski has a lot of skills that are really going to work against Max Holloway. Volkanovski does not commit with his punches. When Volkanovski fought Chad Mendes, I thought, you know what, Holloway would beat Volkanovski. When Volkanovski fought Jose Aldo, we saw a completely different guy. We saw a strategist. I still picked Holloway to win in the first fight anyway because it was hard to pick against Holloway in the first fight anyway. I know some people picked Volkanovski, but still, it was very difficult to pick against Holloway in that first fight. But Volkanovski against Aldo showed a guy who can throw feints, who can make Aldo freeze in front of him, who can tap him with leg kicks, out leg kicked Aldo in that fight. I know Aldo doesn't really throw leg kicks anymore, but still, Volkanovski showed he was a completely different person. He wasn't just this tough brawler that went toe-to-toe with Chad Mendes and came out on top because Chad Mendes gassed out. That wasn't the case. He's now a complete fighter. He's got great strategy, great skill sets, training at CKB, which is all systems go right now. I just think Volkanovski beats him. Every single time Holloway throws a punch, he steps a little bit forward with his lead leg. Do you know why he does that? Because he's a combination puncher. He's not the type of guy to stick you with a jab and then get out of there and look at you for 5 seconds and then bounce around and then come in to look for another jab. He's a combination puncher. He rarely throws single shots unless he's trying to get a read out of you. When you do that, you need to take a step forward because you don't only have to be in range for your jab, you have to be in range for the rest of your combination to land as well. Which means you have to be pretty close fucking range with a shorter guy in Alexander Volkanovski, who's got the power advantage over you, who's got the reach advantage over you, and by quite a long shot as well. I mean, Alexander Volkanovski, let me see the reach here. 71.5 inches to 69, considering that Volkanovski is 4 inches shorter than Holloway. Holloway's not 5'9". What is the UFC doing? He is not 5'9". I refuse to believe that. Holloway's like 5'11". Jesus Christ, these stats are all wrong. But even still, Volkanovski's got the reach advantage over a guy way taller than him. He's got the power advantage. Holloway has to close the distance against a shorter fighter with the power and the reach. It just doesn't make sense. And we should have seen this coming in the first fight. And I'm going to take that. And I'm going to use that we should have seen this coming in the first fight to dictate how the second fight goes. Another thing that I know, Max Holloway has not been training for this fight. I'm seeing the headline right now. Volkanovski says he's not buying it. That is the headline. But Max Holloway reveals that he has not been training or sparring for UFC 251. And he's been doing all of his training over a Zoom class. Max Holloway is not the type of guy to lie to trick his opponent. I've never seen that out of Max Holloway. Let's say if Conor McGregor came out in the Khabib rematch and said, I haven't even been training, I've just been doing this and do that, and I'm still going to beat his ass. I'd maybe think, okay, there might be some mind games going on. Holloway's not that type of guy. Okay, he just isn't. If he tells me that he hasn't done any sparring, I haven't seen any sparring footage of him. That's some evidence out the window. Like, we can maybe assume that he's right by saying he's not sparring. I was already picking against Holloway when he told me he wasn't sparring and wasn't 100% in the gym yet because of all the situation with the lockdown. I genuinely worried that maybe he gets finished. I don't think he gets finished. But, you know, it could happen. I think he's going to lose by decision. I think he's going to lose the first 3 rounds again. I think he might come back on in the second and fifth, in the fourth and fifth round, in the second to last round and the last round, is what I was trying to say. And I think it might be the same score again, but Volkanovski just does things a little bit clearer and lands bigger shots because he doesn't break his hand in the first round. I would assume that. Volkanovski doesn't break his hand. Volkanovski just wins this fight 4 rounds to 1, 3 rounds to 2. I don't think he's going to go out there and get a finish over Max Holloway, but you know what? I'm looking forward to it. I really am. I think it's a great matchup. Max Holloway has every chance in the world, but things just don't match up for him, man. He's got to close the distance. Not just close the distance. Max Holloway has got to get on the inside. Get on the inside of a shorter opponent. Have fun with that, Holloway. It's a really tough matchup. I hope Holloway wins. I just want to say that before the end of the video because I know that people in the MMA community, if you don't pick their fighter, they just dislike the video and say that you don't know what you're talking about. But still, I love Max Holloway. And this is me pandering to those viewers that are going to potentially dislike. I hope he wins this fight. I really do hope Max Holloway wins this fight. If he does win this fight, he's the greatest featherweight of all time, in my opinion. The first real 2-time featherweight world champion as well, which is a big deal because very rarely in the sport of the UFC do we see guys lose the belt and then go back to get it again. That's what makes GSP so great. However, Holloway is not going to win, man. I hope he does. Holloway versus Zabit sounds so much better to me than Volkanovski versus Zabit. Holloway versus the Korean Zombie sounds so much better to me than Alexander Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie. It really does. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's a bad matchup for him. And CKB, as all systems go, and Holloway's gym is still closed. So it's just a bit of a problem. Not to mention that it doesn't help my subconscious mind when predicting this fight, regardless of all the stats I've just put out there and all the problems that Holloway's going to have to overcome. And I know a lot of people say that Holloway can change his style and Holloway should come out with more kicks. That's not what Holloway does. Yes, he throws good kicks. He's a boxing-orientated fighter that sits pretty heavy on his lead leg and shuffles in with it every single time he wants to throw a combination. Volkanovski's going to throw an inside leg kick every single time that happens. Then follow up with a right hand. Catch Holloway. Holloway's not going to want it. And another thing that people did not see in the first fight. You know what I saw in the first fight? I saw a Holloway that couldn't do anything. I didn't see a Holloway that thought he was winning close rounds, that was trying to pick apart Volkanovski. I saw a Holloway in the first rounds 1 through 3 in that first fight who couldn't really do anything because Volkanovski had him figured out. And only once Volkanovski knew that he banked 3 rounds, maybe 4 rounds in his own opinion, he kind of just let it go. We didn't see the same Volkanovski. He had one hand at that point as well, and Holloway had a little bit of success. I don't think it's going to be good for Holloway, man. I'm going to cough. I have AIDS. But Holloway's not going to win. I hope he does. It's just not going to happen in my opinion. I just don't see it. I really don't. I think Volkanovski's going to beat him. I think the next matchup to make would be if Korean Zombie gets past Brian Ortega. Then we do the Korean Zombie versus Alexander Volkanovski. That would be a great idea, but still, man. This just is not a good matchup, and I think Holloway's going to lose. Unfortunate as it might be. I'm stalling right now because I knew there was a point that I needed to make that I'm not making, and I have not made it yet. And I'm hoping that if I keep speaking nonsense and useless words long enough, it will eventually pop back into my head. Yes! I said a while ago. Holloway has a style of fighting where it works until it doesn't. As soon as someone figures that out, it's going to be very difficult for him to change his style because Holloway has built a reputation of being the guy that breaks people and being the guy that eats every shot anyone throws at him. And when you go up and get rocked really badly against Poirier and then have a little bit of a less than vintage Max Holloway performance against Frankie Edgar as well, who got KO'd by Korean Zombie in the first round and Brian Ortega in the first round, it starts to look a little bit bad for Max Holloway. I hope he wins. I just don't see it happening. Alexander Volkanovski 3 rounds to 2. Thank you for watching the video. Click that button there, like and subscribe. I'll see you later.